We live in a world that's absolutely obsessed with showing off. Everyone's displaying their lives, their achievements, their faces nonstop. The most grounded people are the ones that don't show off, and somehow, they have more peace, more clarity, and they are more power than anyone else. What's wild is that we've been taught that the quiet ones are hiding. That if you're not posting, you're insecure and socially awkward. Maybe you're broke, boring, or maybe you just don't have a life worth sharing. C. The most dangerous person in any room is the one who doesn't need anything from you. The person does not need your attention, approval, and your acknowledgement that they exist. They know they exist. So they don't need a notification to confirm it. That's not an accident. There's actual psychology behind why staying invisible gives you an advantage. We're actually talking about narcissistic supply, self-concept theory, social comparison processes, privacy calculus, attachment styles. You know, the whole psychological framework. So let's dig into the actual science behind this behavior and why these people might be onto something the rest of us are missing. This is Mind and Shadow Script. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. Let's get started. You know that every time you post, you're feeding something. And I'm not talking about your audience. I'm talking about this internal system that psychologists call narcissistic supply. Narcissistic supply is basically when you need external validation to feel whole. You need other people to reflect back to you that you matter, you're interesting, or that you're valuable. And social media is the perfect drug dealer for that addiction. You post a picture, then wait for the likes. You feel good when they come in and feel terrible when they don't. So, you post again and adjust the caption. Then try a different angle and check again. Then the refreshing starts. What's happening here is that you've outsourced your sense of self to an algorithm and a bunch of people who are mostly scrolling while taking a shit. So let's about social identity theory. This concept was developed by Henri Tajfel, and it explains how people define themselves through group memberships and social categories. Do you know that posting photos on social media is basically a form of impression management? That's a term from Erving Goffman's work. You're controlling how others perceive you by curating what you share. You're basically performing your identity. There's the thing about authenticity versus performativity. When you're constantly managing impressions, you start experiencing self-concept confusion. You lose track of who you actually are versus who you're presenting yourself to be. Some people opt out because they want to maintain what psychologists call an integrated self, which means that their private self and public self aren't fragmented across different platforms. They're the same person everywhere, and they are not performing different versions of themselves. Now let me tell you about communication privacy management theory. This was developed by Sandra Petronio, and it explains how people make decisions about revealing versus concealing private information. According to this theory, we all have mental boundaries around what we consider private. Posting photos online is essentially moving information from your private boundary to your public boundary. And that decision involves a psychological process called privacy calculus. Privacy calculus is basically a cost-benefit analysis your brain does unconsciously. You weigh the benefits of sharing, which include connection, validation, social capital, against the risks, which is judgment, loss of control, privacy invasion. For some people, the risks always outweigh the benefits. They have what researchers call a high privacy orientation, which means that their psychological threshold for disclosure is much higher than average. There's also something called boundary turbulence, which happens when your privacy boundaries get violated. Maybe someone shared your photo without permission, or you got unwanted comments. That creates psychological distress, and some people respond by completely withdrawing from photo sharing. Research shows that people with anxious attachment styles, based on attachment theory from Bowlby and Ainsworth, tend to have more rigid privacy boundaries. They're protecting themselves from potential rejection or abandonment by controlling their visibility. Let's talk about self-discrepancy theory, which comes from psychologist Tory Higgins. The theory says we have three versions of ourselves: the actual self, who we are; the ideal self, who we want to be; and the ought self, who we think we should be. When there's a gap between these versions, we experience psychological discomfort. Social media amplifies these discrepancies. You see other people's ideal selves all day long, and then you look at your own photos and experience what's called upward social comparison. That's when you compare yourself to people you perceive as better off. Do you know that this actually triggers something called cognitive dissonance? That's the mental stress you feel when holding contradictory beliefs. You believe you're fine the way you are, but social media makes you feel inadequate. Those two thoughts clash. Some people resolve this dissonance by avoiding the source entirely. No photos posted means no comparison, discrepancy, and dissonance. It's a psychological defense mechanism called avoidance coping. Studies on social comparison theory, originally proposed by Leon Festinger, show that constant exposure to idealized images increases anxiety and decreases self-esteem. People who don't post photos might be protecting their psychological well-being through strategic withdrawal. There is a fascinating theory about the locus of control. This is a concept from Julian Rotter's social learning theory, and people with an internal locus of control believe they control their own outcomes. And people with an external locus of control believe outside forces control their outcomes. When you post photos online, you're essentially surrendering control. Algorithms decide who sees your content. Other people decide how to interpret it. You lose agency over your own image. Let's look away from the psychology and also see normal reasons why people don't post online. The first one is high-value individuals and people in positions of power often maintain low profiles deliberately. They understand that visibility creates vulnerability. Competitors, adversaries, or opportunists can't target what they can't see. It's not really about paranoia, but strategy. The second is that posting online takes time. Curating, editing, captioning, responding to comments, and monitoring engagement takes hours every week. People who don't post have made a calculation, and they're investing those hours into building businesses, developing skills, making money, or spending quality time with people who actually matter. The third one is that some careers demand silence. Lawyers can't post about cases. Doctors can't share patient stories. Finance professionals can't discuss deals. Government workers handle classified information. High-level executives are bound by NDAs and insider trading laws. In these cases, their silence isn't a choice, it's a requirement. The fourth is that the rich people stay quiet for a reason, which means that posting about your lifestyle, your location, and your routine is a security risk. It attracts theft, kidnapping, scams, lawsuits, and people asking for money. The truly wealthy understand that flaunting wealth makes you a target. Silence is a form of asset protection. The fifth is for the competitive advantage. In whatever arena you compete in, for example, business, sports, or creative fields, silence is strategic. Because tell me why you would broadcast your strategies and your moves. That's like handing information to your competition. The entrepreneur building a startup doesn't post about their product before launch. The athlete doesn't share their training methods. The artist doesn't reveal their process. They operate in stealth mode until they're ready to dominate. Surprise is a weapon, and you can't surprise people who've been watching your every move online. The sixth is that when you don't broadcast your life, people who want to know what you're up to have to actually contact you, and this filters relationships naturally. The casual acquaintances fall away and real friends stay in touch. In this way, your social circle gets smaller, but infinitely more meaningful. You're not maintaining shallow connections with hundreds of people through likes and comments. You're having real conversations with people who matter. The seventh is that it helps with legal and reputational liability in the sense that anything you post can be screenshot, archived, and used against you later. In court, job interviews, background checks, divorce proceedings, and sometimes in custody battles. People who don't post are protecting their future selves from their present decisions. One bad photo, misinterpreted comment, or a controversial opinion can follow you for decades. The person who stays silent maintains a clean record by default. No digital footprint means no digital ammunition for enemies. The 8th one is the freedom from obligation, which means that once you start posting regularly, people start expecting it regularly. So, you've created an obligation to maintain your presence. When you miss a few posts, people ask if you're okay. When you post less frequently, the engagement drops. It becomes a job you didn't apply for and don't get paid for. People who never start never have to maintain it. They're free to live without the pressure of consistent content creation. They don't owe anyone updates. The last point is that they have control over personal narrative. When you don't post, you control the conversation about you. People can't screenshot your words and twist them. They can't quote you out of context, and they can't build a narrative about who you are based on your digital history. You remain a mystery, and in that mystery, you get to define yourself in real time, face to face, in ways that can't be archived or manipulated. The most dangerous people you'll ever meet don't have Instagram bios. They have lawyers, accountants, and NDAs. They don't announce their wins online. They just collect them quietly while everyone else is busy announcing theirs. So ask yourself, do you want to look powerful or do you want to be powerful? Because the answer determines whether you post or whether you disappear. And the people who've already disappeared, they're not missing out. They're 10 steps ahead while you're still trying to get the lighting right. Choose wisely.